Welcome to the Everything Epigenetics podcast, where we discuss DNA regulation and the insights it can tell you about your health. I'm Hannah Wett, and I'm the founder of Everything Epigenetics. Today, my guest is Dr. Jamie Justice. I've been really excited for this one. Jamie is, some of you may have heard her speak at many of these healthy aging longevity-based conferences or have seen her online doing webinars and seminars for this amazing XPRIZE, which we'll touch about here soon. But really on this podcast today, we are covering what it means to have and just be a healthy ager. We talk about lifespan and healthspan and how we have that 12-year gap between living long and living well, and even some of the potential consequences the world may face as a result of large aging populations. We chat about some of the biggest factors that influence health span over the long term and even specific lifestyle changes and interventions that can help maximize our health span. And then, are these interventions accessible solutions? And where are some of those biggest gaps or challenges? Where are we falling short right now as, a species, as a human being in this world? The second half of our conversation today is going to be all about the XPRIZE and this global competition to really measure interventions that are going to help us live longer, looking at immune function, cognitive function, and muscle health as well. We then end with where we see this work going in the next decade or so, and any other breakthroughs that'll start closing the health span gap on a larger scale. Now, an introduction to my guest today, Jamie Justice. As I mentioned, she's the executive director of XPRIZE Healthspan and the EVP of Health at XPRIZE Foundation. She has published a lot. She is actually a professor in internal medicine section on gerontology and geriatric medicine in the healthy aging and Alzheimer's prevention at Wake Forest University Medicine. She graduated and had her postdoc training at the University of Colorado Boulder, and again, director of the Biogerontology Lab and co-leader of the Integrative Biology Core. She is dedicated to geroscience, which advances the hypothesis that by targeting the basic biology of aging, the incidence of multiple age-related diseases can be delayed or prevented. And her training and background allowed her to lead translational research to test the geroscience hypotheses in humans. She has her new role, as I mentioned, of the executive director of the 101 million XPRIZE Healthspan, and she operates this global competition to drive teams to develop innovative solutions that make healthy human aging possible for everyone. I hope you all really enjoy this one. Now for my guest, Jamie Justice. Welcome to the Everything Epigenetics podcast, Jamie. I'm excited for you to be here today.
It's great to see you, Hannah. I'm really excited for the invite. Thank you.
Yes. Now, what an introduction. I gave people information all about your background and, what you do now. And of course, the XPRIZE, which we'll talk about in the second half of our conversation today. I've heard you speak at many conferences. And of course, I've watched, a lot of the webinars that you've done online as well. And I really want to hear it from you directly before we hop right into everything. But how did you choose this field, this area to study? And really, as you look back as a little girl, did you ever imagine studying aging?
Probably not as a little girl. When I was really young, I wanted to be a veterinarian. So I loved critters and animals. And I had a couple of very tolerant parents who let me, I don't think I really gave them much of a choice, is that I would often stuff with snakes, insects, critters in my pockets and bring them home. Or stray cats, stray dogs, everything went with me. I think one of the wilder ones, again, there was a baby bat that had fallen off its mother, and I collected it when I was little and was able to nurse it with a tiny syringe for a few days it probably wasn't even a few days, probably shorter than that. In my child mind, we had that thing forever, but it was probably maximum 12 hours. Until we could get a rescue to come in and pick it up. So, this is just the sort of stuff that I did all the time. And so I was convinced I was going to be, I really wanted to be a veterinarian. I wanted to study animals. Animals happen to age. That's something that goes with them. But at one point in elementary school, We went camping in Texas. And this place we were camping, when you put your shoes outside the tent before you can put them on in the morning, you have to sort of take them and you smack them down against your hand or against the ground because scorpions like to crawl into the toes and come out. And just a testament to how committed I was to critters. The scorpion came out and I named him Elmo and decided he was my best friend. And so I had a couple of scorpions. Elmo is the one I remember the most. Not all of them were collected in the wilds, but this is what I did, and I loved them. And but Elmo and scorpions need live insects in order to survive. And so suddenly, between Elmo and I think we had a couple of others, is that suddenly I was keeping feeder animals for the first time. And I remember having these large cricket hotels because he liked like juvenile crickets, and they had to be, and they had to be live. And so during maybe fourth or fifth grade, when I was in elementary school, we had a state fair or the science fair for the state. And so my project that year, that I don't even know if I remembered starting it for the science fair itself, but I started keeping track of the crickets, is that I liked them just as much as the scorpion. And so I started my first lifespan study without even realizing it. And started keeping track in each of the little cricket hotels, how many were alive and how they were doing, and what the quality of life is basically for the cricket as much as I could, and ended up separating them into little hotels and then giving each one a different diet. So I had some of the crickets were fed potatoes, some were fed apples, and I think in the third maybe like oranges or something. And I kept this going for months, that I would just track how many were alive in each one, how many I would take out, and out of which ones I would feed to Elmo. And inadvertently started doing my first diet and lifespan study as
Yeah.
a kid. And so now looking back on it, I wish I could find that calendar, because I just kept them in like a little kitty cat calendar, like that kids have on the
Yeah.
and turned that in with all these pictures and this whole story to the science fair. And I don't remember if it was potatoes or apples that won, but I remember it was not oranges. Crickets and oranges,
Okay.
not a great mix. And then I also kept track to see, Elmo, were any of them were better fed? Did Elmo like them better? And I remember being disappointed to learn that he just liked them alive and didn't really particularly care what they had been eating. So was I at that point, did I go, man, aging, yeah, that's it. I'm going to be running lifespan studies and try to work on health span for the rest of my life? Absolutely not. It actually wasn't in retrospect until I started working in aging that I went back and realized it was like, actually, this is probably really fitting.
Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. I hope you can find that calendar one day and like
Too.
put it in your office. What a story. No, that's awesome. So yeah, you're a true animal lover at heart. I was the same way actually. I wanted to be a veterinarian growing
Oh,
up. But yeah, shifted aspects. I remember, digging my hands in the dirt and getting crawfish in the creek in our backyard
yeah.
and turning over rocks, doing all of those things as well.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that there's a certain and I do think it probably, I loved artwork. I wanted to be an artist, or writer, or a veterinarian. So something
Okay.
in those worlds. And that I think that there's a natural, I think kids do it naturally, but there's a natural inquisitiveness, right?
Hmm.
And that some of us are okay with the creepy crawlies and just find it all fascinating. But and I think the actual practice of science, and maybe of just learning how to be a decent human, is just trying to keep the childlike wonder, keep the inquisitiveness of,
Yeah.
I should still wonder what's under that rock.
Yeah.
And if something flies or wiggles or moves, is going, I wonder what that is and why. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that there is, I think there's an innate part of that we either learn how to feed for the rest of our lives, or sadly gets put away in some people.
Of course, of course. I think that curiosity component is just super, super important. And I think studying aging is great for that, right? I think there are more questions than answers. I know that I come across within, my day to day working in this field. So I appreciate that little backstory. I hope everyone's interested in the stories and what we're going to talk about today now. But Jamie, healthy aging is a term we hear very often. I see it thrown around on social media, even on other podcast webinars, seminars, et cetera. And it can mean a lot of different things to other people too. So in your own words, how would you really define healthy aging? Why do you think it's so important for people at all ages? And like, why is it the hot topic right now and everything we're studying and looking at?
Yeah, I actually think it's probably not just the hot topic now. I think it probably has been forever. I mean, people have been chasing the fountain of youth and in various forms for as long as we've been alive. But I think it's just within the last couple of generations is that we finally have the opportunity to talk about healthy life in a more global way. Is that it's not just for the very few anymore, is that with advances in public health and, basic trauma care, maternal care, infant care, nutrition, vaccines, and good water, is that we now already live a lot longer. And so we've had now the first few generations since those major public health shifts that are now aging. And so I think we have, for the first time, a real opportunity to look at, to think about, and in some cases to grapple with what a long life, but with an extended period of poor health, is to think about if that's something we want for ourselves and what we're willing to do for it. And so again, I don't think it's necessarily just a shift. It's just that it's very present. Is that, the extension in life expectancy has increased, certainly in the US by about 30 years over the last 100 years. And that if you look at the health adjusted life years, is that they have not necessarily kept pace. At least in the US and many developed nations, is that there's at least a decade of period that's spent in, and again, not just with a chronic disease, because that's, many of those we've learned how to manage and live with. But it is really something that increases risk, impairs quality of life, leads towards, functional decline, disability. And I think that that's a lot of what we end up worrying about, is less about death and more about the period where we're no longer engaged or living a life that we would recognize.
Yeah, definitely. And what we're talking about is that lifespan health span gap, right? I
That's
think a
right.
lot of the listeners are super familiar with that and what it actually means.
Well,
I guess when you start to think about it, and yeah, I mean, why do we even believe maybe this gap exists? And what can we do to start closing it? Is it that the technologies are really catching up now? And I don't know, like you mentioned, it's not
yeah.
necessarily a hot topic. Maybe it's because I'm live and breathe this every single day. People do want to chase the fountain of youth, but now it's like, I don't know, there's maybe more awareness around it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think there is a more awareness around it, and I think it also has to do with sort of generational interests, right? Is that suddenly, at least in the US, right, we have the baby boomers who were born just after the World War, is that they're now largely not just aging themselves, but have almost all probably lived through caring for a parent.
Mm,
And that's, starting to realize that. And I think in many ways, it's that generation begins driving the discussion. But those that I see are really picking up the call and doing more work are actually in younger generations who don't really want that really reactive, wait till the end attitude about life and aging. Is that I think, we're willing to look at it, willing to take the blinders off and begin trying to pursue what would health look like, not just the absence of disease, because I think there is a quality of health that is more than just what it lacks.
yeah.
And so I think many of us are actually looking at this and trying to figure out a way to be proactive about our health. What do we do? How do we tackle it? And see it as, one of the great challenges that we're not just going to roll over and take, but try to figure out in some way and see if there's a better system or way of doing this. And that we have had major advances in the last few decades that have shown some light that, actually by studying the biology of aging, which is ultimately studying our health, how we live, how we age, how we develop, is that there may be ways to actually begin to get some traction in this issue that has, for, at least the current generations have seen as almost an intractable problem. And the
Mhm.
truth is that it's likely not.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's super interested when you sit down and talk with anyone about
Yeah.
it. For the most part, I would say, I just had a really great, fulfilling weekend with my family. My parents came to visit me, and I just talk to them about this stuff all of the time, right? Like, I want to get all their tests done, their blood work. I want them to live forever because my mom's parents, they passed away, years ago, and I'm like, oh, like feel like my mom's like the next in line, right? Like I want her to be around forever. So,
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'd say that's also really true. And I had got to have a wonderful conversation with my mother about 2 weeks ago, maybe before she
mhm.
went. My mom's a firecracker, so she's always going, doing something. She's in her mid 70s now, and she's still working. She flies north of the Arctic Circle in Alaska during the school year about every 2 weeks. And when she's home, she's in Colorado in the mountains. She sold a house and bought a Sprinter van that has room for her kayak and her skis and and so she's still going and doing all of these things. And so I saw her about 2 weeks ago. She'd just come home from Italy. She's now in her mid 70s. She still loves to go travel, do things, just really experience the world in a way that she didn't give herself permission to when we were young.
Yeah,
And so now she's out just sort of living the life that she's dreamed of.
that's
And it's so
amazing.
cool to see. But we sit down and we do this regularly. So this is not like a one and done, but, sit down and we went through what she was at the house last. She said, okay, now turn to serious. Let's go back through my power of attorney. Let's go back through, it's not like she's going to leave us, huge amounts of generational wealth or anything, but she really is concerned about this. She's like, what I want to know is I'm in my mid 70s. She said, I just want to know, am I biologically like my mother? In which case
Oh,
she's like, am I going to have dementia in 3 years? And so I should just get out and live it all. Or have I, changed the way that I live and maybe I'm more protected. And, she wants to know if she is biologically as well as she feels.
hmm,
Because for her, it's about planning is she's got to do some financial planning, figure out if it's time to settle down a little bit and maybe start thinking about a single level home or and preferably close to where we are so that we can have more access, or if she can continue her contract and still work and travel and live and go do. And so I think that that's one of the cases when I think about biomarkers. And I know we're going to talk everything epigenetics, but when she asked me, what would you do? And so this is when we had the conversations. We're like, great, this is the opportunity to really talk about a great use of biomarkers is
hmm,
my freewheeling, free living mom wants to know, should she plan for that trip next year or put those
yeah,
pennies in the bank, and try to get a stable house? Can she renew her contract for another, 2 to 3 years to keep going to Alaska, which she loves going on prop planes to these remote villages in the winter and, she's adventurous. And
yeah,
so, so these are where some of those questions start coming in. And in some cases, it's about, do we have an intervention or something to change it? Or for her, it really is sort of just, it's a life planning stage that I think she also recognizes that, we're not our chronologic age. We're not the candles on our cake. And simply looking to what happened to our parents and trying to use that and read the stars to see what's going to happen to us is it doesn't necessarily give the full picture.
right.
And so, so again, I think definitely sitting down with the family and having those conversations. One, be willing to talk about death.
Hmm.
Two, be willing to talk about end of life care and things that are not pleasant. And that also that there are some really novel tools and solutions that can be used for practical purposes.
Yeah, yeah, that's such a good point. No, I love that little story. Yeah, your mom sounds like someone I would want to sit down with and talk with all of those things about too, the firecracker. Yeah. My parents are, go, go, go and traveling. Like I mentioned, they came this weekend from Ohio. They spent their weekend in Lexington. They're going to Gatlinburg. Like my stepdad's retired now. My mom's still working.
Yes.
But they're just loving life. And I think, want to do
Yeah.
everything like you mentioned, they weren't able to give themselves the grace to do as they were younger and growing up and raising children. Um, and now, it's a great segue into kind of our next section too. Really, I wanted you on here to speak about the X Prize, right?
Of course.
And I'll have you go ahead and give an introduction to that soon. But to your point, I mean, there are and there is testing, there are these interventions that are starting to appear that, may help increase health span, may help increase lifespan. And I think that's the $1 million question. I work with a lot of integrative functional healthcare providers every single day. I'm speaking with them. They're really translating the research and bringing this care to their patients. And that's the biggest question I get. Hannah, what looks the best? What looks the best, right? And a lot of this is still undergoing research. I don't think there's really a definitive answer. And it's super, super specific depending on the person's end goals
Yeah.
and, how they want to approach that particular care. And I think the XPRIZE is going to really start to dig at that question and give us some of those answers. So this is a really exciting initiative. I don't know that the audience will be super, super familiar with this. So could you just dive into the XPRIZE Healthspan global competition and what this is?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I mean, it's something, it's quite new. It's fairly different. We're actually in what we call primary registration phase. So the prize itself is just starting. So for our listeners who are just hearing about it, it's a great chance to get involved and learn more. And so what XPRIZE Healthspan is it's a 7-year global competition where we are incentivizing teams that could be companies, academic groups, scientists, others around the world, incentivizing them to accelerate development of therapeutics to go into clinical trials. And the therapeutics that we're talking about, these are not for a disease. And so this is really different than how traditionally medicine is approached and practiced. And so what we're asking teams to do is to create a therapeutic, either alone or in combination, that can improve muscle cognitive immune health in a 1-year span. And so this is really important distinction is we're not asking for people to delay an event, or this is not necessarily prevention or to attenuate declines, is that we're really being, these have to be very proactive approaches. So again, you're improving, say, your VO2 max or your ability to walk long distance, your exercise capacity. You're improving your muscle power, improving how well you can complete cognitive tests, and improving immune function and response to challenges. And so that these are what we've identified as sort of the simplest set of measures that give some glimpse at the quality of health, but that are also designed in that way that, again, so we're incentivizing improvements, not just declines, over a 1-year period. Is I think, that there are a lot of therapeutics that are out there and people get on them and you kind of get excited about whatever it is. And maybe there's a placebo effect too, and, 60, 30 days. If you don't begin to see or feel some benefit, it can be hard to convince people to stay on those when they might already be on other medications or have a lot of things competing for their interest and their ability. And some of them can be, require some effort and burden on the individual or have their own risks. And so, we really are trying to prioritize this, is that we've also have, in doing focus groups and speaking to older adults, is that this is something they want to know that they're feeling and looking better. And looking not just in the mirror, but I mean, that there are little signs and little evidences in their own life, that it has to be more than a blood work test. Like they want to be able to feel different when they're playing with grandchildren. They want to be able to remember grocery lists better, or, some of these things that are really important to how we function and live. And so that's really where we came to those 3 endpoints. And then working with a team of scientists to identify sort of appropriate measures within that. So that, again, for anybody who's doing therapy testing and drug development, or even working in a clinic, right, the burden of proof is on the investigators, that we have to prove it to the person that it's worth the potential risk for changing their life. And that can be for anything. It can be for something as simple as diet and exercise to, recommending they get more sleep or whatever else. Is anytime you change somebody's behavior, there's always an attendant risk, even if it's in the good way. But the burden is on us to show that change is worthwhile. And so it's not that we don't think biomarkers are important, whether it's epigenetic clocks or others, is that I think they're vitally important. But that we have to let function and health be sort of the North Star, and that we can use these trials to try to better develop and validate biomarkers that would likely be more sensitive, so that then you get a surrogate for some of those internal sort of health or intrinsic capacity kind of metrics.
Sure. Gosh, yeah. I'm so excited for this. Like I'm just so excited to see all of the teams, start to get a read on everyone's
Yeah.
ideas, right? And what they're trying. I think this is such a great initiative because you're quite literally saying, all right, there are probably groups already doing this. Let's
Mhm.
streamline it somehow and start to get yeah, more research documented. I think that's a huge need in the field too. So yeah, I'm super excited to follow along. Um, and you mentioned, again, it's really about function, right?
Mhm.
Feeling better, feeling an outcome. I think a lot of times with, these molecules, or I don't know if it's a certain supplement or what have you, there are these kind of claims around it, but then you don't actually feel that change, and it
Right.
can be quite difficult to resonate with, right? Is this working? Is it not? So
Yeah.
what are yeah,
And
go ahead.
another component with that is that, the way that we're doing this, and there's also a disconnect in how we run clinical trials. So if you have anybody on that's listening in that is really on the science space and the just development and testing space, there is a bit of a disconnect in how we run trials and then how things are prescribed in clinic. So whether it's a functional medicine clinic, a longevity medicine clinic or other, um, when we run trials, we run them and we report them as the averages. No one has ever given a drug based on the averages. You do this whether you're prescribing exercise, a drug, a therapeutic, a biologic, it doesn't matter, is that they should all be based on the personal response. And so we're also using this prize as an opportunity to push that narrative a little bit further. And so the burden of proof for our trials is whether this team, whoever it is, whatever they're using, if and whatever their approach, if they can improve an individual's function.
Mm,
So, and on all three categories, not one, not the other, but all three, if they can extend it and or improve the function to a point that it offsets expected declines in 10 years, 15 or 20 years. And so, again, really going after those personalized response thresholds, which are closer to how people would want to take a therapeutic and certainly how a doctor or clinic would be prescribing or administering those.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's good information as well. And just to name those three categories again, you said immune, cognitive, and muscle health,
Muscle,
right?
that's right.
Okay,
Yeah. And
perfect.
muscle's broad. I mean, we're really
Yeah.
talking about physical performance, mobility. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And then, yeah, you mentioned like, all right, well, it's really about feeling better functionally in all three of those
Mhm.
categories. And I think this is open ended to a lot of the individual teams' approach. Are there any required biomarker testing they
Yeah.
need to do before and after too? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're going to be handing out a protocol book. So to
Okay.
anybody who makes it to our finalists, and there'll be 10 finalists named in 2026. We have 2 milestone points along the way. We're currently, I just checked the numbers to see if we'd hit it. We're right at 475 teams that have pre-registered around the world. We still have, they have through December to get those applications, and December 20th is our submission date. Uh, We'll go down from all of these teams, go down to our top 40 next year. Those top 40 have to run a really early stage trial. It's mainly like a check for us to make sure, can they get their regulatory documents in order? Do they have a clinical testing site? Can they recruit people? Can they prove that they're ready for trials? And that's really the next stage. And then in 2026, out of those, we'll name our 10 finalists who have completed early stage trials already, that we can evaluate those. And we'll name the top 10 approaches that will be used in the finals. And so we will work with those investigators once we get to those top 10 to see which specific measures they can include in their clinics, because they'll be running their own studies, but they'll have to keep a common data book.
Mhm.
So we'll work out the details of exactly which protocols are feasible and which ones aren't. We'll go through, give very standard procedures for how to do specimen collections and how to handle those specimens. Anything that's biomarker based with biospecimens, we would like to run those centrally so that the cost isn't on the team, and that we'll have a way to compare directly across each of those teams. But then, yes, once they go into the field, they do their own testing, they record everything into our books, they send the samples centrally, and they'll be measuring things at baseline 3 times, and then at follow up after 1 year, 3 times.
Yeah.
And that's what we're using to determine within each person, did they meet these thresholds? And then out of your group on your treatment or your program, your plan, how many of those out of everyone that you had met those thresholds? And so we'll set it by threshold. So really,
Got it.
again, prioritizing the individual, but making it so that it's going to be very hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm excited to see people get super creative, right?
Yeah, me
And
too.
let's say, yeah, let's say there's a team, right? I don't know, they're entering, and do they have to have a certain number of people, or could it literally just be N of one? I mean, obviously you have more
Yeah.
power.
So yeah, so these are essentially we call them single crossover design trials. So they're
Mm,
not perfectly, and even N of ones, you can do aggregate N of ones. And so strongly recommend that. There's some great reference material for those that might be listening along interested in that. But the N of one approach is that typically the N of one, N means sample size of one, is that doesn't mean you only recruit one person. It just means statistically they're handled as if they're their own study.
mhm.
And so the single crossover is a way that we're making it more obvious that you have to recruit more than one person, but that we're still using some of that principle to define how we see success. And so for each one of these, the individual, they are their baseline levels. We do get multiple baseline levels so that we can make sure that this is their standard, their stable state. Then they do whatever the intervention is, totally up to the teams. And at the end, we do repeat those measures again. And so it doesn't just mean that an N of one perfectly, but that they're going to be recruiting multiple people. Ideally, what we're looking for, and again, we have not put this in writing because we actually want to make sure that we can interface with the teams when we talk about this,
Mhm.
is that ideally we would be getting to 100 subjects at the end, research subjects, human subjects, that have either been randomized to the protocol or therapeutic solution, or some standard control.
Gotcha.
And that we're not defining exactly what that control is until we can talk to our teams. Is that in some cases, if they're testing in a patient population that maybe has some stable or managed condition, is that their control might look different than someone else.
Mhm.
And if the approach that someone's using is, because again, we're not even mandating that it be a single drug. Like these are not necessarily just drug trials. These could be things done in combination with exercise, lifestyle, sleep, circadian, it could be anything in there for behavioral change. It could also be, people are welcome to use sort of a personalized approach, but you have to be very strategic and say up front, like, what is that?
Mhm.
How is it done? How will you use monitoring in your own study to determine course of action? And it has to be very clear and something that can be replicated.
Mm.
And so, leaving all of that to the teams. And so there is an enormous amount of innovation, but that we have to at least give them a standard book at the beginning and at the end, and that they have to do it in more than one person. So again, ideally 100 people at the end. And depending on what their intervention is, that means that they may need to recruit 150.
Right.
They need
Yeah.
to recruit, more than that. It just depends on what kind of attrition or how many dropouts they expect to have during the course of the intervention.
Understood. Yeah. What I really like about this too is, again, it's starting, I mean, it's not standardizing everything, but it's making people, yeah, document what they're actually doing. I mean, again, all these practitioners, right, they take this personalized approach or this N of one approach, right? What does that really, really mean? What are they doing?
Yeah.
And I think having that documented and clearly stated, will help, you all evaluate these teams. Really, where are we starting to see that change?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and
yes.
it may be a great differentiator even for that clinic. I mean, if they really do have sort of the right algorithm that they're
Mhm.
using, I mean, that could be a major differentiator because, these concierge health, longevity medicine clinics, functional medicine clinics, and prevention clinics, they're popping up all over, but there really is a difficulty, just as in weighing specific drugs or therapeutics, there really is difficulty in understanding the pros and cons or
Yep.
differences between each. And
Yeah.
so I think in some ways this even gives those clinics an opportunity to, really not necessarily templatize, but to really hone in and get very clear about how they're making clinical decisions.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Um, without giving too much away, I was really excited to ask you this question. What do you think are some of the most promising or innovative approaches you've seen from the XPRIZE participants so far?
Oh my. So, yeah, so I would say that result, That's still very active. We have a lot of teams and areas coming in.
Yeah.
Last at the end of October, we did a real deep dive to figure out sort of who is entering the competition, what gaps do we still have, yeah, who, and some of it has become very like a personal sort of a high touch thing. It's like, I know you're working on this, enter it,
Right.
and
Yeah.
trying to get certain strategies that aren't represented in there. That we have a wide variety, and I think this really speaks to the global nature of the prize, and that we're really trying to democratize science. So we have, really high level academic, hardcore scientists coming in. We have some various sizes, different pharma and biotech startups. We have clinics, we have individuals, we have everything from community health solutions. That there are some favorites of ours are coming in. Even in terms of we have some groups in India that want to show that their lifestyle practices
Yeah.
have benefit. And so that whether this is for yoga, meditation, diet, lifestyle, things that are for them are very traditional, very ingrained in their culture, of showing that has potential benefit. We have everything from that to a sake brewery company coming in.
Really?
And so, at least on our side, our marketing department has decided they don't care how good it is. They want to go visit.
They're like, yes, a reason for me to go and travel now.
Like, I don't care if it works. We're going. And so, and then we have a number of, of approaches that people are coming in and being very thoughtful about, again, the things that our grandmothers have always told us that work, and figuring out sort of clever ways to actually implement those in ways that people will adhere to them, in terms of sleep, diet, exercise, the basics.
Yep.
And then we have, certainly teams proposing much more novel therapeutics. And I think these are some of the spaces that I get excited about. That there is a space here for people testing repurposed drugs, things that have been shown over and over again in animal models that have some suggestion of effect in not just male mice, but also females, and have been translated into dogs and to monkeys. And there are now clinical trials in humans. There are a few of those repurposed agents that we really strongly expect and have been pushing teams to come in with to test them on a larger scale and in a rigorous, defined way. We also have, and again, many of those repurposed agents, I would say they tend to fall within nutrient sensing pathways or metabolism. So if I think of sort of one camp of things, these are things that alter cellular metabolism.
Yeah.
And so that's one class. And so we certainly see those coming in, and we expect to. Some new, some very well established, long-term tested.
Sure.
We have others that I would put under sort of immunotherapy camps. So these are anything for me that that are either actively using the immune system as the vehicle for delivery, or are specifically sort of immune targeting. We have others that are even using sort of secretome products as part of this biologic solution, and that's been really interesting. And then we have a whole other camp of what I have started lovingly called the 3 R's. And so there's the 3 R's for me are, rejuvenation, reprogramming, and regenerative approaches.
Okay.
And so again, and that category is broad. Those can include gene therapies, they can include stem cell therapies or other biologics. They can include, my goodness, we have not seen a recommended organ transplant yet, but certainly heterochronic transplantation is something that has been shown in animal models. We don't yet have one of those in our studies that I've seen yet. Again, we're opening the door to any approach. And so there's certainly our case for to figuring out what those would look like. It may be difficult in the context of this prize, but that there are, even without thinking about organ transplantation models, there are heterochronic approaches. So these are things, right, that were discovered in animal models where if you take a young animal and an old animal and you pair their circulatory systems, that you see a rejuvenation in the old and a change in the young. And so that there has been an enormous amount of work of figuring out different circulating factors that could be used, whether you have to administer those as part of a transfusion, or if you can isolate what maybe those proteins or factors are, give them in some other delivery platform. So, we certainly do see some of those coming in. And it's kind of interesting. It's, again, we're not dictating what people do. As long as they are able to receive their own regulatory or ethics behind it, then, fair game.
Yeah. Yeah. Geez. I feel like our imagination, like as humans, is really the limitation here. I mean, you all are taking anything and everything. I think
Yeah.
selfishly, I'm probably most interested in, the repurposed agents, like you mentioned, or the 3 Rs, gene therapy, the therapeutic plasma exchange, right? The young plasma exchange could be really, really interesting. And I think, again, I like the challenge of, hey, we're putting a timeline on it. We have to start to see those improvements after a year as well, right? Which
That's
is
right.
needed.
And that's a pretty aggressive timeline. We have some people who maybe they've only been testing agents in animal models or in cell culture, organoids or others, and they look at 7 years and like, oh, it's so long. And you have anybody who's ever done drug testing and clinical trials, or therapeutic testing, especially if you're doing something novel. I mean, it can take you a couple of years just to get through the regulatory burden to even get to that trial. And then to run a 1 year, I mean, it can be, that's a pretty lengthy process, and we have a very aggressive timeline. So for those waiting and watching in the wings, just know that those teams are going to be incredibly busy to proceed within the prize. And we do try to provide them some funds along the way to do so. So it's a $101 million prize, but we do take 20 million of that and break it into milestone awards. And that we couple those milestone awards actually with investor and funder summits. And so 10 finalists that actually get there, is that by that point, we've awarded them at the first milestone, 250,000, at the second milestone, 1 million. So those come from us. But then we also host those summits and try to at least give them fertile ground to make the connections that they need. That, our goal, of course, is knowing that it's going to cost more than $1 million to run a 1-year trial, is that, we hope to at least provide enough foundation that we don't want the money to continue to be the limiting factor for teams. And there's an opportunity for them.
That'll definitely help them out as well. Of course, I have to ask this question. You briefly mentioned it. I know we've been really talking about the XPRIZE here. Since this is the Everything Epigenetics podcast, where do you see, epigenetics playing a role in this? Is it, it could even be down to the therapeutic level in terms of reprogramming, epigenetic modification, epigenetic therapy, right? Instead of targeting the genes, but actually those epigenetic markers, or maybe even as a biomarker that people can measure along the way. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, a lot of thoughts. So you're correct. In one sense, it can be both a therapeutic approach or strategy. It can be used to monitor those therapeutic approaches or strategies in the reprogramming context, or it can be a broader use biomarker. And so a few ways teams can choose to do their screening any way they want. This is another area we leave up to the teams. They get to define their population so long as they're within the age range that we provide, 50 to 80, which is pretty broad, and that they at least define how they're selecting people. So, that's one area that we expect to see a number of people turn towards these epigenetic clocks, is to try to figure out, is there a biologic risk, sort of thinking back to my mother, where maybe it's not evident in the chronologic age or even just sort of her freewheeling lifestyle, but that there might be something sort of under the hood that might suggest whether she might be at risk or be a good candidate for therapeutic. So we expect teams to use that on their own. Some of them will. Others will have other methods to define sort of what that risk or entry criteria look like. Some might use the epigenetic signature as a way to dial in their therapeutics, so that they can do their own sort of internal monitoring if they're looking at sort of that more personalized approach, or see if this is working, or do you back off on the exercise? Do you build this in? We're not saying that there's certainly are things that teams can do directly,
Sure.
Another use for us is that, we have had long discussions about whether and how to include DNA methylation markers in particular, and also proteomics and a few other select biomarkers in the context of the trial, right? Is that we're asking teams to improve muscle cognitive and immune function. But there is a place where these overlap, right? This sort of latent construct of biologic age that we would love to be able to measure and monitor. And even though it's not set up explicitly within our criteria, we're leaving the door open that if there really is something that becomes validated that we all confidently stand behind at the end, that we say, oh no, this would mean something to someone. If science advances to that point in the next 6 years, it's not that we'll say no, but we would need to get buy-in from our teams to use that as an additional criteria, and our judges and sponsors.
Yeah.
In lieu of that, within the prize is that I have been on a warpath over the last year of what I ultimately would love to have added to this is I've been actively seeking sponsorship to create a biomarker bonus prize. I think it is a shoo-in, and I see the enormous value in it, is that it's just as important as we're developing therapeutics to also develop and validate biomarkers, and that we're going to be providing therapeutics from at least 10 different trials, structured, very intentionally structured in these single crossover N of 1 trials, so that for people doing biomarker work, you're not just looking at 10 trials, you're now looking, if everyone recruits 100 people, you're now looking at a 1,000 person data set that's standardized. And that you're going to have some agents that work really well. You're going to have some that don't. You're going to see personalized response thresholds. And that there's going to be these huge non-responders that you can really get in and do biomarker development. So my real goal is to continue in the next couple of years to try to fundraise around that and see if I can get someone to create with us a biomarker bonus prize so that we can include additional biomarkers. Those would have its own endpoints in addition to the muscle cognitive immune that we're testing for the grand prize. But I think it would have just as an important impact on the field and would have its own commercial runway at the end.
Oh, definitely.
So that's my ultimate goal. But, again, it takes somebody seeing the promise as much as we do in order to step up and to help co-create that with us.
Yeah, I love that.
So until we can get that fully fleshed out, I would say at minimum, what I'm trying to get included in the trials at minimum as a resource for scientists and investigators at the end is I would love to get DNA methylation added, and I would love to get some broader proteomic analysis done. And then we'll also offer up to teams if there are other more novel biomarker approaches that could be included, is that, barring that, it would really be up to particular providers with the teams to figure out what they want to add to really fully flesh out their trials. But
Sure.
I'm trying really hard in the background, guys.
Call for sponsors.
Yes, we are a nonprofit, and so we don't make money on these. So it really does. We require and really rely on our donors, our sponsors, our supporters, our partners.
Of course, yeah. No, I would love, for that to be a part of the competition.
Yes,
Again, I
and-
think biomarkers are just as important, and I think just being able to look at all of the data, right,
Yeah.
and a standardized way, and say we need these biomarkers. We can no longer wait for these 40-year longitudinal trials to happen, right? We need a source of truth that can happen a little bit quicker as well. So I appreciate that, Jamie, and I know we're getting to the end here. I feel like I could talk to you all day about the XPRIZE and all the amazing work that you're doing. Last question, really, to round out the podcast questions here. We can expect to see the end of this, right? Around 6 years? Is that when you
said?
So
2029, the teams have to finish their clinical trials, and we go in for deep judging and biomarker analyses and the rest of it. In 2030, we'll be announcing the winner.
Amazing. All right. Well, we'll have to have you back on in 2030 to talk about the winner.
Major time points a bit in between. So again, we can talk about the strategies in more depth after we hit our top 40. And that's going to be in the middle of 2025. So look for those announcements in May. And then again, when we get to our top 10 finalists, that'll be in 2026.
2026. Okay, perfect. All right. Another question here. I ask everyone this at the end of my podcast. You'll like this one because I feel like it's up your alley. If you could be any animal in the world, what would you be and why?
Okay. Oh man, this is such a great question. So which one would I want to be? I would say I have two. Oh God, I have so many favorites. I really do have so many favorites. I think the experience of being a bat would be pretty amazing. Is to
Ooh,
be a flying mammal. They live a long time. Echolocation. How badass is that?
yeah.
They live in these huge, complex communities, which I think is really remarkable. I think that they're one of my all-time favorite animals. They're like the improbable. They're the mammal that shouldn't yet do.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
so many ways, they're remarkable.
And that's why you found
Um,
that one when you were a little girl too. There you go.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I do. So I have a soft spot for bats. And then I would say my other two favorite animals for very different reasons. Owls. I just love owls. They're
Mhm.
again, big feathery idiots, and they're they're
They're
incredible.
so cute.
They're superpower. And then to have the empathy and the love of an elephant.
Oh, yes. Yes. Elephants are just, I've seen so
Yeah,
many videos of them like interacting with humans and like,
absolutely.
yeah, just, I don't know, being, yeah, these massive, massive animals, I don't know, out
Oh,
in the
yeah,
wild. And
just I could
yeah.
watch them all day, watch them move, watch them walk, watch them interact,
Yeah.
I'll do all the elephant things that they do. So those are my top 3 favorites, but if I had to pick one to be, I'm gonna go with the bat.
All right. We're going with that. I don't think anyone said that before, so I love it. Well, I will link all of, the XPRIZE stuff, everything we talked about in the show notes for anyone else who is interested. Jamie, very last question. If anyone else wants to find, I don't know, anything in particular about you or the XPRIZE, what's like the
Of
best link or
course.
where can they go?
Yeah, so the best place to go, and you really should, if you're thinking about competing or if you just want to follow along, if you go to xprize.org/healthspan, and that's xprize.org/healthspan. You can go there. You can get access to our competition guidelines. You can sign up for our newsletter so that you can follow along. We do put out newsletters on the prize and about XPRIZE, so you can keep up with where we are and what's happening. You don't miss any of those prize announcements or big winners. And then there's also, you can get access to, in some cases too, we have a social channel for all of our teams to connect to, which is a lot of fun. So if you're a team, make sure that you go back on there and make sure you're plugged into our socials network. Again, you can find out anything you want to about the prize there. You can learn about the people running it, and get more information as we'll keep posting things there. Again, that's xprize.org/healthspan.
Awesome. Sounds good. Well, thanks so much, Jamie. I appreciate your time. And thanks everyone else for joining us at the Everything Epigenetics podcast. Remember, you have control of your epigenetics, so tune in next time to learn more about how. Thanks, Jamie.
Great. Thank you, Hannah.